Cool. Should we start? So good morning, afternoon or evening folks, dependent on where you are throughout the world. Welcome to our fourth webinar in a series of global Women in DevOps live panel discussions. Today we'll be talking about Pride in DevOps, LGBTQ+ inclusive workplaces. You can expect an hour of a panel discussion with a live Q&A throughout and half an hour of networking for those that wish to continue the discussion further. My name is Neal and I'm the co-founder and marketing manager of Women in DevOps, and I'm driven to promote equality in technology, addressing the gender DevOps gap to empower people and to ensure everyone's voices are heard. So I'll be your host and chair for this evening, morning or afternoon. So Women in DevOps is a not-for-profit initiative devoted to empowering people in the DevOps industry and improving the gender imbalance and striving to promote equality in technology. Our unique platform has become a global movement and is used to not only amplify the voices of women, but the LGBTQ+ community to break down the barriers and drive positive change throughout the tech world. So although there are many tech organisations across the globe who are inclusive and have built non-biased technology, real-life interactions have transformed to apps, emerged online platforms, and the digital community continues to grow and thrive as we use technology to stay connected and create and enhance inclusive cultural norms. So there are many influential LGBTQ+ people in the tech industry, with Tim Cook, the CEO at Apple, perhaps being one of the most powerful when he publicly came out with his open letter in which he simply wrote, "I'm proud to be gay," as his strategy to support the LGBTQ+ community. There are still many hurdles to overcome to support the LGBTQ+ community, with which we have conducted some research and found that 59% of respondents have experienced gender inequality in their role, and 90% of respondents said they do not know or had no transgender specific policies at their place of work. So it's pretty eye-opening stuff, but this enables us to understand that there is an issue that needs to be addressed, from teaching kids in schools on LGBTQ+ inclusive content, company cultures, biased technology, tackling alienation to mindfulness of people's differences and workplace discrimination. So our aim today is to help drive positive change by having a meaningful discussion on how to create LGBTQ+ inclusive workplaces, discuss experiences, reflect on progress, but also highlight that there is room for improvement on how to affect positive change beyond geographic and physical boundaries and unite our DevOps LGBTQ+ community. So we want to make this as engaging as possible for you all folks. So if you do have any questions throughout, please do insert them in the chat box, which is just below here, or there is a Q&A section as well. And we'll try to get through as many of those as possible. And lastly, just so everyone's aware, this is being recorded and it will be uploaded on our Women in DevOps YouTube channel, where you can also access all of our previous webinars. So that's enough from me, which I'm sure you're all pretty happy to hear. So I'd like to introduce our fabulous panel, who are currently in London, Boston, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And we'd love to know where our audience are. So if you could input where you are currently in the chat box, it'd be good to know where everyone is. And now I'd like to introduce our panel. So if you could each individually introduce yourself, your role, your experience, and a key passion, either in DevOps or in general life. And let's start with the lovely Aubrey Stearn, the interim CTO at Oakam. Over to you, Aubrey.
Thanks, Lucy. I definitely probably don't need to tell you where I work at the moment then. But yeah, I work in the interim space. I am an interim CTO. I have a relatively wide career in operations and as a programmer, working in cloud infrastructure as well. So very generalist, very wide. I haven't really specialized in anything, to be completely honest. I've worked for firms like Nationwide, Pizza Hut, Travelodge, and lately Oakam. Lots of fintech, lots of really interesting, good stuff in the DevOps space. I'm a really big believer in the synergy we can find with developing engineers that have multiple vertical depths, so that really nice wide horizontal breadth of knowledge, and then there's multiple vertical depths. That's where you really find value, almost moving away from T-shaped engineers into like an M-shaped engineer space. And I guess that's kind of what I try to breed in the teams that I grow. And yes, that's mostly me. I guess Back to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Aubrey. And next up, we have Forrest Hanford, a DevOps leader and founder of a not-for-profit called Employee Empowerment. Hey, Forrest.
Hey, Lucy. So this is how out I am. Like I literally wear this to Boston when I go to work. So like it has the trans symbol and the pan flag. So that's how I identify in the community. I'm clearly an activist and fairly outspoken. I've been doing DevOps for over a decade, and I've been in management for about a decade. So yeah, Employee Empowerment is a nonprofit I recently founded to help reduce the wage gap. And while I'm doing that sort of most of the time, I am also looking for a new role. I had been at the engineering manager at Affectiva, but unfortunately I was laid off with many other people. And so I'm looking for something new.
Amazing. I definitely suggest to all our listeners to check out your Employee Empowerment initiative. It's really, really cool stuff that you're doing. And next up we have Steve Demeter, an engineering manager at YouTube.
Hey, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's wonderful to be here amongst these esteemed colleagues. Steve Demeter, been in engineering for about 20 years now. Been in management for about 10. Currently hold a position with YouTube. I guess you could say my passion is people. I love great strategy and execution with passionate teams, finding the right fit of work for the right people, developing careers, and bringing out hidden talents. So again, thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have Pamela Burga, a diversity and inclusion leader at Live Nation. Hello, Pamela.
Hi, thank you, Lucy. Hi, everyone. It's so weird not to be able to see everyone's lovely faces, but I hope you're all doing well and taking good care and keeping healthy in these times. So Pamela Burga, I'm from Los Angeles, and I think one of my biggest passions is diversity, and specifically diversity in tech. Before Live Nation, I was at SpaceX, and through Live Nation owns Ticketmaster. I've always focused on how to elevate diversity and inclusion programming for different employee populations. So I'm first generation American, first generation college student, and a lot of moments in my life, I think, are what personally roots me in that passion. And I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Thank you. Excited to have you. And just looking through where everyone are across the world, we've got Dallas, London, Oakland, Streatham, Dublin, San Francisco. So thank you, and Dublin. Thank you so much for joining us, folks. So let's start with Steve. So when it comes to LGBTQ plus equality in the workplace, we still have a way to go. How can we develop a clear mission for supporting LGBTQ plus in the workplace?
So thank you for asking that question. That's a wonderful question to start with. It's a big question. I think one with a broad set of answers. I think a lot of books have been written on the comprehensive ideas around forming, corporate mission strategy, communicating that mission throughout your organization. I would say if you're looking for like a comprehensive kind of answer, you might want to check out the book Vivid Vision by Cameron Herold. This is a book I've used many times personally when setting out to establish organizational vision and mission. I guess in the interest of time, if I had to narrow down my answer to giving one piece of actionable advice on the topic of developing a mission for LGBTQ plus, I think I'd say listen to your LGBTQ folks. I think soliciting our buy-in and collecting diverse perspectives early and often is key. Many of us have been brought up through less than ideal circumstances. We may be the only ones in your org who can share real perspectives about, what kind of language and behaviors and, things we'll tolerate and not tolerate in the workplace. We may know special signals and cues to look for, during the hiring process. And we're probably going to be able to tell you, what constitutes suitable allies for people across the diversity spectrum. These qualities, again, may or may not be obvious to someone outside of our sphere, so it's super important to involve us and develop that trust. Giving us open and honest platform will help us feel, I think, connected and heard, and help drive a culture of inclusivity from the get-go.
Definitely. I think it's important to stay connected and listen to your employees. Did anyone else have anything else they wanted to include on that? Perfect. So technology and design can increasingly inform and shape culture. Aubrey, is true gender inclusivity about creating systems for change or culture for change?
I think it really depends. I think for me, like top-down leadership, and I think Steve mentioned this on the call when we had this, that it's a really underrated power. So coming in, especially like someone like myself, and being different, being part of the LGBT community is a big signal for either organizational change or that something is different and positive here, and it potentially is a safe space. And operating at the CX level, obviously that's a relatively big signal. I tend to think about environment as like a garden, and we all know that plants can grow virtually anywhere. And I think these environments, you have to ask yourself, what is it you're trying to create? I mean, culture is your collection of behaviors and beliefs and moral values and customs all wrapped up into what we package as an environment and culture. Do you just quote Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, life will find a way. Is that what you want to grow? Do you want employees that will find a way to thrive in a hostile environment? Do you want folks that will operate in a particular way, like mayflies, able to just get out a small burst of work before they burn out or leave the organization? Or do you want that long-term investment in the garden to grow, a diverse portfolio of beautiful flowers and plants? And that's your organization. Your culture is a long-term investment piece, and it's something that will pay dividend over time, and it takes a while to develop. And culture insight is also like very difficult to measure as well. So your temperature check on whether something is doing particularly well in your organization or not isn't always the easiest thing to get feedback on, and isn't the easiest thing to measure as well. And I think in big organizations there are lots of false signals as well. So it's something that I think certainly top-down leadership really, really helps with. And I think it's probably a long way. I'm trying to get to the point where I'm saying this is like many, many things that factor into this, but having strong leadership and having strong signals for change inside that leadership can be incredibly helpful.
Definitely, and I love that metaphor of the garden for your kind of description of that. I think. Does anyone else have
wordy descriptions?
Does anyone else have any input for that kind of area about creating systems for change or culture for change?
I think it's a great answer. I think garden is a really good metaphor, because you can plant seeds and they go any single way. You can't control that. I think patience is a lot of it. You might get something you didn't expect that is completely unrelated to what you're going for, but nonetheless valuable. So yeah, good analogy.
Definitely. And moving on, so according to Boston Consulting Group, nearly 2/3 of LGBTQ+ employees in the UK think that their workplace lacks commitment to diversity. Pamela, how do we support the LGBTQ+ community with company culture?
Yeah, I think that's really that's what differentiates companies that are walking the walk versus talking the talk. And it's the proof is in the pudding of the employee experience. So similar to UX, employee experience looks at the different points in an employee's life cycle. And so from the very beginning, I think it's important to look at how is an employer making sure there's diversity within their interview panels, that during the onboarding process, there are messages of inclusivity and how that's important, and in the leadership and how that's modeled. Then, like when you think about the portion of the employee life cycle where you're you're trying to grow your people, similar plans, to their fullest potential. What are you creating so that it's creating so that it's helping foster an environment that's fruitful for all employees? And I think that employee resource groups can be a huge deal, can be a huge differentiator. So at Live Nation Entertainment, we have our Pride Nation network, which I want to say that there may be close to 20 around the globe. And so I think it's especially helpful for companies that are decentralized and have locations in various cities, because on site you have programming that can help with career development, exposure, high visibility projects, community partnerships that ultimately, I think, increases employee engagement, but also helps to foster partnerships with community organizations that are serving LGBTQ communities too. So it shows, I think, externally the values that you're walking the walk, and you're actually fostering this culture of inclusivity for your LGBTQ plus employees. And then lastly, I think something that can be beneficial and is oftentimes afterthought is the physical space. So the physical part of your employee experience. If, for example, you have TV screens by your elevators, what a great opportunity for you to highlight Heritage Month. We were just talking before this call that in LA, June is Pride Month. So highlighting information about Pride Month, highlighting employees, leaders all across different levels in the organization who are doing great things at the company during, not just during the month of June, but like using that also as an opportunity to elevate and enhance people's awareness across the board. I think that's really important. And then lastly, I would say the tactical aspects of healthcare benefits and making sure that there's equity and in what's offered to our LGBTQ employees, and then in learning and development. How are we making sure that anti-harassment, bystander training, and content that's elevating awareness around concepts like allyship are available and widespread through the company, so that it becomes an organic second nature aspect to the company culture. And it's not something that's just rigidly forced into, oh, here's the diversity training for today, but it's something that's embedded throughout the entire employee experience.
100%. It's just like the small changes which can actually make such a big impact. 100%. I'm loving the cat there, Steve.
This is Mr. Huckleberry. He says hello.
Oh gosh, he's very cute. And Forrest, a question for you. So significant research suggests that diverse teams help aid exposure to differences and change experiences and perspectives. It drives innovation, it improves performance, enables creativity, and has the ability to transform the world. How do organizations become more inclusive with their interview processes?
Thank you, Lucy. So I'm going to answer this with my experience as a hiring manager. One of the big things that we've already touched a little bit on is example, right? When you have examples in leadership, that can be very helpful. So like the Tim Cook example that we talked about earlier. When I was working at Affectiva, the head of talent, the VP of talent, he was very out as a gay man. And certainly that actually helped when I transitioned, gave me somebody to talk to. But certainly the people that interviewed with us, having a conversation with him, I think could be very helpful in realizing that we were an inclusive environment. Something that isn't necessarily specific to our community, but inclusion in general, is resume sorting versus blinds. So we've all heard of, doing resume blinds. So taking off all demographic information from a resume. Well, what I actually do is sort of the opposite, where I go through resume stacks when I'm hiring, and I actually look for the people that seem like we have a lack of on our team. So for example, like if we have no Latinx people, then, they would like rise to the top of the pile. And then I would review the resume to actually see, well, okay, these are people that, we don't have included in our team right now, but do they actually meet our needs for the team? And sometimes it ends up being, I end up hiring a white straight man, but it gives me the opportunity to have me and the team look at the candidates that can have the position, and specifically candidates that we lack or don't currently have as members of our team. Pamela already mentioned having a diverse interview panel. I completely agree with that. And it's always been important to me to make sure that there's a diverse interview panel, because it's both helpful for the non-diverse candidates and the diverse candidates, because with the non-diverse candidates, when they talk to a peer or even a junior member that's interviewing them, if they talk down to that person, or if they're sexist to that person, or if clearly they've got homophobia or transphobia, then that's something that they can, then the interviewer can flag and be like, we don't want this person in our culture. And I've had those experiences where somebody seemed fine to me as the hiring manager, but then to one of my team, was very problematic with. And then I was like, okay, well, we're not hiring that person. But also for the diverse interviewees, it can also give them an opportunity and a safe space to talk to somebody at that level, to ask the questions. Like, for example, when I'm interviewing at a company, I want to talk to a woman who's in a leadership position that's equivalent to mine to figure out, are women actually respected in that company? Are they going to be mansplained to? Like, will I be accepted? Will I be listened to? That kind of thing. And the last bit that I wanted to mention is that Facebook has this wonderful program that they open source called Managing Bias. And I think that interview panelists should take that, and specifically you can try to do I think it's called the IAT, implicit association tests, to see there might be specific implicit association tests that are related to our community, but there are certainly many that relate to different diversity and inclusion demographics.
Interesting. I've never heard of that. We'll definitely check that out after this. So we've just had a question through. Oh, no, it's not a question, sorry. It's just a comment. So a study commissioned by the gay dating app Chappie and published on Wednesday, January 16th, 2020, found that over half of gay men said that they have experienced discrimination at work because they are gay. Steve, how do organizations take LGBTQ plus discrimination seriously?
Good question. So if you're concerned your org isn't taking it seriously enough, there's a couple things you can do here that'll allow you to take immediate impact. I'm a big believer in the axiom that it's not what you say, but what you do. I've always believed that it's important to establish strong anti-discrimination policies in your recruitment and promotion practices. This should be a policy that the org can commit to and execute real penalties for, no matter how high up the food chain. It's important that all employees know this policy. You can encourage this by conducting workplace training, especially for management and senior leadership. This policy should be reiterated via open door communication throughout the org. For example, bringing it up, reinforcing it from time to time in one-on-one as the need arises. But yeah, promoting and encouraging a culture of trust and honesty and transparency is, I think, really the focus here.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. Being transparent and open will obviously enable people to be more open to opening up about things. So thank you. Did anyone else have any input on how organizations can avoid or take LGBTQ plus discrimination seriously?
Probably only to say that it's that top-down change, and I think folks tend to look to their leaders for behaviours and sort of that cultural sentiment. And I think that again, if you make it clear that bad behaviour isn't accepted as a leader, I think that's something that tends to propagate through an organization. I'm a big proponent of sort of having folks at the top level that push down as well as folks that push up.
Absolutely. And I think it's on us. If steering the ship from below is difficult.
Yeah.
If you have execs that exhibit bad behavior, you don't have to work for that company. Engineers are everything to me, and they are very heavily sought after, and they don't have to work somewhere that they don't want to. So if you go in an entry somewhere and you're not digging it, you don't have to work there. There's many other places you can work.
It's actually really strong advice. I was on a women in tech panel, I think maybe last year or the year before, and a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, in fact, I think she actually asked this and said, I'm at this company and it's, I'm trying to do all this change stuff and they're not really listening to me and I don't really feel valued. What do I do? And my advice was just pack your shit up and leave and go somewhere else where you will be valued, because, bottom up change is incredibly difficult. Even if you have the numbers to pull it off, it's incredibly difficult. If you have just one person at the top who is that wrong person for that time and space or whatever, exhibits the wrong behaviors, just go somewhere else. Like, don't waste your time. Like, because it's ultimately like not your business, and there are plenty of businesses that will value who you are and how you are.
100%.
To see if I could add something. What is heartening is that I think we're seeing more accountability coming external, like from an external push to companies. There are a lot of articles, I think, that have exposed inappropriate circumstances in workplace culture that are driving change. And I won't name the company, but I was just looking at something this morning, and it was exactly that. People are starting to share their stories, and in a world where like social media is paramount, I think we're seeing a lot more diversity teams that are being formed at companies, and it's a direct result of this.
100%. And we've just had a question through from Cara. What sort of systematic changes do you think are effective?
Challenging. I think in terms of like the hiring, I know Forrest has touched on like her hiring process. Mine's actually pretty different, and I actually kind of want to say it's okay to be a straight white guy. That's there's nothing hostile about being a straight white guy. My process is one where it's sort of bilateral. So it is bilateral. You will meet me and you will meet my entire team, and that's kind of how we hire. So we want you to get a feel for who we are as a team and organization, and we want the feedback on that as well. And you'll meet pretty much everybody you're going to work with. So our interviews are relatively long form. They're very much meritocracy. So we don't particularly look for, I would say most of my hiring processes, I don't particularly look for a tech fit. I look for like a thinking fit. I look for a fit with the team. I look for folks that love what they do. I think for me, the most important thing is that you love what you do. I think, for a lot of folks that comes across like really well in their interviews. I think we've had some folks that maybe are a bit more introvert, and we've been able to tease that out of them, and we try and find, I think we have definitely folks on the team that are quite good at working with them. I know that when I started out in life, I was very introvert, and I'm probably not now. And I think that's almost certainly, well, definitely one of the reasons is transitioning is quite a difficult process, and that makes you relatively resilient to the world. And so being an extrovert is quite useful in that. But I think, those sort of processes where you meet folks like me who are different, especially at that C-level, really big signals, really big changes. At Nationwide, the platform that I ran got called the only safe place to put somebody neurodiverse, which I was incredibly proud of. That was probably one of the nicest things anybody ever said about the things that I built and my team had built. So yeah, I think, again, just those really big signals in your team in terms of like institutional change. And, as a leader, I always ask myself, what can I do? And I think some of the challenges I had at particular organizations around hiring, like for example, when you realize there are too many men in your team, not too many, but you would like some more like female diversity in your team. And you think, why am I only really getting men through the hiring process? Like, what is that? Is that the language in our CVs? Is that the talent pipeline. And so I was able to go and chase at each stage, you know, was it the way that we had worded things in our CV? Were words weighted more towards men than they were women? Do we have gender bias in our language? Was it, you know, the hiring pipeline? Was it the area we're working in? You know, were we able to open up a satellite office in an area where, you know, we would get more diverse candidates? And I think, again, this is just, it's another example of being in a leadership position where you're able to make those really big changes. And I know they're very difficult when you're not in that position, but if you are in a leadership position, and, you know, if you're not, aspire to get there, because it's where you can really make a big difference.
100%. And I guess moving to the next kind of area, 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health illness in their lifetime. However, members of the LGBTQ plus community are twice as likely to have a mental health condition. And Aubrey, this one's for you. Obviously, mental health can often be seen as taboo, but it shouldn't be. So how can workplaces become more inclusive when considering the mental health for the LGBTQ plus community?
I feel like every answer I give you will follow the same theme, but I get to use my platform an awful lot to do, I hope, a lot of good that I face. And you know, I remember working back in an organization probably in the first year of my transition, and you know, you don't look great, and you're not very accomplished, and you're pretty crap at everything, and you don't feel great either. And you're going through this thing, and people don't really understand because they're never going to go through this thing the way that you are. And I remember trying to explain, like, I struggle in the mornings taking the tube in London because, you know, I basically look like a freak show, and people stare at me all morning, and it causes me to break out in like menopausal hot sweats, and I come in drenched in sweat, and it's like a super bad time for me. So, hey, could you move the morning scrum back by like 30 minutes just so I can avoid rush hour, and I'll feel like 200% better during the day, and that'd be super awesome for me. And the answer was a firm no. And that really sucked. And I thought, you know, somebody asked me once after a talk, you know, how do you know what to do as a leader? And I said, well, just look at all the bad experiences you have when you're not a leader, and you wrap all those things up and say, I'm just not going to do those things, I'm going to do a lot better. And so for me, this is something that I talk about because folks have, you know, hidden things that they're not able to talk about or not able to put on, you know, to you and say, like, I'm struggling with this. And so I try and create space for those folks. I also talk about, you know, things that I struggle with. You know, I transitioned all coming up for 4 years ago now. And, you know, very few people know that I struggle to take the tube in the morning. I have massive anxiety because of that first year and some of the really like awful experiences that I had in the mornings. I sometimes skip maybe 2 or 3 tubes in the morning just with the sheer anxiety of getting on and being worried that people are going to stare at me or laugh or talk about me and point, and all those things have happened. And you know, funnily enough, they don't happen anymore, and I've had surgery and I think I look tons better, and you know, those things don't happen, but that muscle memory of those terrible experiences is still there. And so few people know that about me, and now everyone knows that about me, but it's something that I'm more than happy to tell my team because I don't know what they're dealing with. But if they know what I deal with on a daily basis and the things that, you know, can sometimes get me, I can quite often, I'm still have a real lack of mastery of my hormones. And it's probably really weird to see a 6'8" transgender woman like bawling their eyes out in the office occasionally, but that does happen to me when like the emotions get overwhelming. And I like to think that it makes me one, very human and accessible. I never wanted to be a leader that was in an ivory castle or inaccessible. You know, when you find yourself with a CTO and there's this person surrounded by 5 other people, you don't really know who they are and there's no sense of person. I never wanted to be that kind of leader. So to talk about these things and to be a real person with other folks, you know, working with them rather than them working for me is really important. And I think, you know, again, just being able to tell my stories and being able to create, you know, a platform potentially where they can talk about the things that they're dealing with is one of the best things that I could possibly do or anybody else could possibly do. And then I guess there are all the initiatives inside the organization for, you know, creating safe spaces where people can talk about the issues they're facing or, you know, get the time off that they need. Certainly, HRDs are masters of the the dark arts when it comes to things like that. And again, you do what you can in the position you're in.
100%. I think it's important to be transparent and open with these kinds of things, and that will drive change as well. And Forrest, what can organisations do to attract more LGBTQ plus people in the DevOps space that they aren't doing today?
Yeah, and really for any space. So one thing that I would say is that when I'm currently looking for a job, right? So when I'm talking to people, whether they're hiring managers or part of the talent team, you know, I'm interested in seeing things like, you know, do they have their pronouns in their email? So there are people that aren't trans that sometimes think that, oh, well, pronouns are just for trans people. And in fact, I've even had a recruiter once say, oh, right, I knew you were trans because you had your pronouns in your the bottom of your email signature. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we got to fix this. Let's have that conversation. So I mean, the conversation is that in order to normalize it's in order to normalize sharing of pronouns and asking of pronouns and respecting people's gender identities, we should optionally have people in a company, you know, mention that information in their LinkedIn, mention it in their Slack their Slack profile if they use Slack, mention it in their email signatures. I think those are all great flags to people outside of the company that, hey, this is an inclusive place. And, you know, even for people that aren't trans, like seeing that, you know, if you're other parts of the rainbow, seeing that, oh, you know, my trans friends are probably pretty welcome there, so maybe I'll be welcome there too. It's definitely an indicator. But a warning about pronouns: do not enforce it, do not require it, because someone who has not transitioned, someone who is not ready, would be put in a very awkward place if it was a mandate from up high. So optional pronouns is one thing, and the other thing is that it drives me nuts for my non-binary friends that anytime I go into a company, an organization, a public building, and there are single stall bathrooms that are gendered, because where does the non-binary person go? I mean, for me, I mean, Aubrey was mentioning her concerns about the tube, and I had similar issues on the computer train. I think I got over them quicker maybe, but still to this day, going into a women's bathroom or even worse, a women's locker room, you know, I'm scared. I'm scared that it's going to be the time that somebody calls the police. It's going to be the time that somebody freaks out and you know, imposter syndrome goes off. So, you know, having a bathroom for non-binary people or people who are thinking about transitioning, that's inclusive, that's gender inclusive, is really valuable. And so, for example, the school that my daughter goes to, it's a private school, but the school that my daughter goes to, 4 years ago, it had a men's room and a women's room. And then she went 4 years ago, and then she was in public school, and then public school was killing her, like almost literally. And then we put her back into the private school that she was in. And I was so happy to see that they had switched both of their bathrooms to be all gender bathrooms, multi-stall, all gender bathrooms in my 10-year-old school. So those are the two things: pronouns and bathrooms.
And I guess it's such a simple change, isn't it, that that can be done in order to do.
I wouldn't mind adding another spin on that. I mean, I don't know if it's a controversial view, but I think there are folks, you know, I'm one of them in the trans community that don't actually feel comfortable with the whole pronoun thing. And if somebody did ask me my pronouns at a conference or something, I would be fucking mortified. For me, and I know that, you know, there are plenty of strongly binary trans women that feel this way. I think ContraPoints did a really good video on this. That's failure. That's a really tough failure that I've probably not faced in a while. And while I might get misgendered very frequently on the phone, it hasn't happened in person for quite a while. And if somebody were to ask my pronouns, I would be absolutely devastated. It would crush me. And I completely understand that, you know, how it helps folks in the non-binary space and folks, especially like, you know, going through transition. But I think there are also people that, you know, have their hang-ups. Like I have my hang-ups. You know, this is, you know, I speak for definitely just myself, but there are others out there that share the same opinion and folks that have different opinions. And I think, you know, when you go through this, especially like transition, you know, you have your bar that you're trying to hit all the time, and you have your internalized standard of when you're good enough, and you have the standard where you're good enough to go to the female bathrooms and pass and not expect trouble or worry about trouble. Like Forrest says, you won't catch me in the changing rooms very often. I will avoid that situation like the plague. When I go and see my personal trainer at work, I'm terrified all day long of the 1 hour that I spend with her because I have to go to the changing room before and after, and it terrifies me because it's one of those situations where, you know, I don't have my girlfriend with me, I don't have anybody to look after me, and something really terrible could happen. And it's, you know, genuinely scary, and it follows you. And you know, even though these things may not have happened to you, they, you know, happen to folks that you know about. I have friends that have been called all sorts of things in public, and it's horrible. It's been horrible to hear that from people that I know, and horrible to watch them go through it. And it just leaves you terrified for the experience when you go through it yourself. And so what I would say is that everybody's different. You know, you should figure out, like, from, I don't know, and there isn't a good way to do this, like what's okay and comfortable for everybody. But I would just say on the pronouns thing, like, you know, if someone were to ask me, I would be devastated. And I don't particularly want to go to gender neutral toilets either. I'm really comfortable going to the ladies' toilets. I did my 3 years of stressing out and worrying about that. I'm super comfortable now, and I will hold my ground. But I completely appreciate that there are folks that are really not in that space. And I think, you know, like this, you know, everybody lives on a spectrum at a different point in the diversity of that spectrum. And, you know, nothing that any of us say goes for everybody on that spectrum.
And I guess that kind of proves why we're having this discussion. We're having a raw, open and honest discussion to kind of raise awareness about topics that matter, and kind of put everything on the table, and kind of, you know, inform folks that this is, you know, this is how people are nowadays, and this is how it should be. And Pamela, I guess moving on to your kind of questions, allies are important and welcome supporters of the LGBTQ plus community. And for any listeners that are allies, how can we be good LGBTQ plus allies in the workplace?
Yes, absolutely. So I just wanted to start off with what the definition is, so we're all on a level playing field here. An ally is someone who is not a member of an underrepresented group but takes action to support that group. And I think in the world we live in, there's a lot of intersectionality. So this can be applied in a very widespread way. The key tips that I would say would be helpful in becoming a stronger ally to our LGBTQ plus coworkers and communities is first to educate yourself, get a greater understanding about history, set of experiences, really listen, really read, really try to inform yourself as much as possible. And then secondly, I think that someone touched on this previously, I think it might have been Forrest, the importance of understanding your own bias, your own unconscious bias. And just to also take a step back for those of you who this unconscious bias is a new term. It's something that we all carry. We all inherently have this implicit bias. It's primitive, primal. I think in short, it's a mental shortcut that we use to make quick assumptions, and it comes from, you know, back when we saw a snake. You're not like sitting there and thinking like, okay, well that's slithering to me. What kind of animal is this? Like you're immediately going to respond based on information that you've gathered throughout your lifespan. But it's problematic in the workplace and can be a barrier in recruiting and promotions and in building an inclusive culture. So There is the implicit bias test, association test that Forrest had mentioned. And I agree, Facebook has open source material out there. There's a lot of information out there that you can start to educate yourself about your own biases, and then think about how you can apply a very practical and tactical methodology so that you're setting guardrails for yourself in whatever way your function might be affected by it. I think that it's also really helpful to build relationships, really be thoughtful about the makeup of your group, your crew at work, your crew at home, your crew more broadly online. Like, how are you exposing yourself to different sets of experiences so that you can have a holistic perspective on how to be a good ally. And then very importantly, be a responsible upstander. So I think that there's some bystander training out there. Someone named Jackson Katz has a YouTube video if you want a quick go-to. And it's oftentimes, unfortunately, it's labeled sensitivity training, but his point is that it's the opposite of that. Leadership, it's leadership, and it takes courage to stand up in uncomfortable situations when you're hearing a remark, when you're seeing something that's not right, to stand up and actually act. So educate yourself about how to be a responsible upstander, and that'll help prepare you for situations that may come up, where you can be an advocate for your peers who are of an underrepresented group. I think another thing I'll just add is that it's very important to also be open to criticism and feedback. It's I think a collective growth process for us, and it's important for you to listen to how you can continuously grow to be a better ally. And then thereafter, there's some tactical ways for how to act as an ally. If you're in a leadership position, if you're managing people, be a sponsor. Seek out those stretch assignments for your LGBTQ employees. When they're not in the room, advocate for them. If you're at a peer level, how can you be an amplifier? So if someone says something in a room that might have gotten overshadowed, someone talked over them, how do you help to voice their good idea and give them credit so that it's given where it's due? And then lastly, I think just organizationally, if you are in a position where you can impact your culture, there's a great example, a case study from Intel, where they actually introduced an entire allyship program. And one of the best practices that they gathered from that was the importance of highlighting in their communications the leadership, both at the middle and executive levels leadership, who was modeling the allyship behaviors well. Because I think we've touched on this previously in our conversation, but that is what ultimately is going to influence and trickle down culture most powerfully. And so if employees are able to see how people in these positions of power are exhibiting good ally behaviors, good ally characteristics, that's what's really going to help them emulate that in a company.
Amazing. And according to some research conducted by FTSE 100, they found that there are more men called John that lead major tech companies than women leading major companies. And I guess the challenge we find is that there needs to be a cultural shift throughout the technology industry, particularly at the top, to ensure complete diversity and inclusion. So Steve, what is the importance of having a diverse and inclusive workforce?
I think the most important thing is to not hire anyone named John. Kidding. No. I think, one thing I'm really proud of is that at YouTube where I work, our CEO, Susan Wachicki, is female. She's been with Google since 1999. She was instrumental in getting YouTube acquired by Google. And she's been our CEO since, I think, 2014. So among her other jobs, if I had to put a word on, I'd say she's like the face of the company. She handles the YouTube Friday all hands every week. And she has just got a very buck stops here kind of attitude. I would say a big reason why she's been able to keep her tenure all these years and drive results is not just being able to come from a diverse background, but also drive, actual impeccable results and deliver unprecedented growth. If you ask anybody, they'll tell you the same thing. She succeeded by genuinely earning respect from those around her. I think this sets an excellent precedent for Google, as well as the industry at large, especially viewed through the lens of diversity. I think this has been mentioned before, but I just want to hit on it one more time. It's, having something like this, gender diversity right there at the top, allows YouTube's culture of inclusivity to trickle down into the day-to-day work, up and down the food chain.
Definitely. And in one of the most eye-opening stats that I think I've personally come across from some research from Forrest, Hispanic women currently make 46% less than white men and 31% less than white women. Forrest, how can we address the gender pay gap issue?
Yeah, so this is definitely something that I'm really passionate about, and it's a large part of the reason I founded Employee Empowerment. So I'm building a SaaS application. It's on GitHub, an open source SaaS application to allow people to share their information, either privately or publicly, depending on how they feel. In the US, in 1935, there was a National Labor Relations Act that made it illegal for employers to prevent people from sharing their salary. So, it's perfectly fine for me to say, at my last job, I was making $172,000 because the National Labor Relations Act allows me to say that. Other countries, might not be protected similarly. And so being able to share that information and then see the demographic information, people could then decide whether they want to work at that company as a candidate. And so somebody in the chat earlier, I'm going to probably mispronounce her name, Kara, she mentioned that, talking about, making the decision with your feet, like going on to another company, that can be really challenging. And I know as a single mother of two, yeah, that's really challenging and scary. I mean, I'm unemployed right now, and my son he just finished his freshman year of college. How do I pay for his sophomore year? I don't know. So another option is that we kind of go old school where we have collective bargaining. So, the tech culture is very anti-union, but there are some things about collective bargaining that are very helpful. Like, for example, being able to have a group, say in Wayfair, be like, hey, this thing where we're making money off of concentration camps, this isn't cool, let's all walk out. And like a lot of people obviously did, they organized that. But if people had a way to do this in the large companies like Amazon or Facebook, and be able to organize internally and privately without the leadership team looking over their shoulders, I think it could really help make a change. Because just because, Jeff Bezos has all these billions of dollars, it doesn't mean that he has all the power, right? If everybody in Amazon walks out at the same time, Jeff Bezos has nothing.
Amazing. And then moving on to, I guess we've got a few more questions left, but what we can do is if nothing's answered, if these questions aren't answered today, we'll do a post-event article. So we will answer those. But I guess to round everything up today, folks, I'll open this up to the panel. What do you all foresee as the biggest challenge for the LGBTQ plus community, for LGBTQ plus people in technology for the future?
Can I there's a little hand up thing, right? I got a gobby mouth as well. I'm going to say that probably the support and social networks that a lot of folks have who are in our communities, they probably don't have access so much to them right now. And I know that there's a lot of physicality in our community in terms of sharing space with other LGBTQ folks and you know, folks that are like you. You know, not having access to that right now is probably relatively challenging for a lot of people. And I think that probably is one of the biggest challenges that folks face is, you know, when do things go back to normal, and when do you get to you know, be around like-minded folk? That's probably my answer. It's not very work related, but
I think that my advice would be for LGBTQ plus employees and allies. How do we hold companies accountable with our dollars and with our feet? On the employer front, I think something that's important to mention is the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index. Human Rights Campaign is the oldest and largest LGBTQ advocacy organization in the US, but it has wide reach and it's global. They put out a list annually that has employers who've been rated 100% across things like the healthcare benefits, training development, employee resource groups, and other really important items. So I think that that's a great starting point to establish what's the bar that all companies should be striving towards.
Good answer so far. If I had to throw my 2 cents in, I would say just to keep up the fight. You know, like, we've come such a long way since, I mean, when I started work in the 90s, I was fired once for being gay, and it's come so far since then, but it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be people out there, and it's always going to be on us to set an example for the kind of culture we want to, you know, pass along to the future generations. So I would say, even though it's better, we still remain vigilant.
For myself, I feel like one of the next big things is really welcoming and embracing non-binary folks. I feel like in many ways they have it really bad right now, and that there's a lot of work to do there. I personally identified to my friends as non-binary for a few years until I realized that, well, wait a minute, like, with hormones, like, no, I'm really female. And I have a lot of close friends that are non-binary, and so you know, that's important to me. Not allowing us to backslide. You know, it's really scary, the leadership in the US right now, and the leadership in other countries right now, and you know, being in the middle of a pandemic, things sometimes get more conservative when there are large crises, right? And there's often backsliding that happens. And I also just want to point out that you want to keep in mind that intersectionality adds to that challenge. So, you know, I as a trans woman might have it tough, but imagine if I was Latina. You know, there's ways that your demographics can make it so that you have even less privilege that complicates things.
So thank you all for really insightful and thought-provoking discussion. It's been a really interesting talk. So thank you so much for sharing your evening, lunchtime, or morning with us, and to our fabulous audience for listening and participating. Any questions that are left unanswered, we will be answering in a post-event article, so we will get through those. For those that wish to continue the conversation further, please do join us in our networking discussion in a new meeting that's on our meetup page, and I'll also include it in the chat bot in a second. We are committed to the pursuit of ensuring diversity and inclusion, building a people-friendly planet, closing the gender DevOps gap, and promoting equality. Together we can support one another and embrace our differences to make a real impact throughout the technology world, enabling diversity not only in the workplace but throughout our communities. To find out more about our Women in DevOps initiative, visit our website on www.womenindevops.com. But for now, everyone stay safe, stay home, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Oh no.